So yeah, hi guys, I'm Tom. I'm going to be talking about event-driven network automation and orchestration. Who am I? I'm a first-timer at UKNOF. It's been fun. It's been really interesting. I'm a chaos monkey at Cloudflare, which is basically just being a network software engineer, but I break things. I'm a contributor at Napalm Automation. I work with some of the main contributors at Cloudflare. So I have a website, tom.strickx.com. Occasionally I put up blog posts, but I don't really do that as much. Probably should start doing that a bit more. Ichabond on GitHub, where you can follow me for the stuff I'm doing. And I'm Strickx on Twitter, where I occasionally tweet some really weird stuff on networking and the general life of things. So Cloudflare. Most of you probably know who we are, what we do. But just for some of the people that might not know this, how big are we? We currently have over 7 million zones or domains behind us, which is pretty big. We're authoritative for 40% about of Alexa top 1 millions. 200 million internet users served, 100 billion DNS queries a day. We're the largest, we're the fastest. We're 35% of the internet requests. And now we're also a resolver on 1.1.1.1. I have stickers, by the way, if anyone's interested. We do about 10 trillion requests a month and about 10% of the internet traffic on it. So that's quite a bit. In March, we expanded our network massively. So we're now present in 150 plus locations globally, 74 countries, and growing with many hundreds of network devices and servers behind it. So yeah, I'll be talking about vendor-agnostic automation because if you're from a company our size, then it's probably interesting to start automating things instead of doing everything manually. Then a bit about Napalm logs, and then using Napalm logs with event-driven automation. So some of you might be asking, like, what's the best tool for automation? What's the best tool I can be using? It's honestly the wrong question to ask. Everybody has a different setup. So you have to ask, what's the best tool for my network, specifically for your requirements, for what you're looking for. For example, like how large is your network? How many platforms or operating systems do you have? How dynamic is your setup? Do you have external sources of truth, like an IPAM or a DSIM, stuff like that? Do you need native caching? Like, do you have REST APIs? Do you want event-driven automation? But one of the important parts is, do you care about the community? Do you care about documentation? Do you care about all the information surrounding the project that you might be interested in? For example, there's plenty of frameworks ready for automation in networking, as mentioned by Andy. Like there's Ansible, which is a fairly major player. There's SaltStack, there's Puppet, there's StackStorm. There's plenty of others that I'm not mentioning and I'm probably just forgetting. But we at Cloudflare, we use SaltStack extensively. Why do we use Salt? It's incredibly scalable. For example, like LinkedIn, they use it for over 70,000 servers. It's an event-driven orchestrator. I'll be coming back to this a bit later. It's easily configurable and customizable. You have native caching and drivers for useful tools, which is really important. You don't really need to reinvent the wheel for everything you do. One of the friendliest communities, in all honesty. It's really helpful. Everybody's open to newcomers. There's quite a lot of information out there, which is really nice. It's vendor neutral, which is really, really important. You don't want to be tied into one specific vendor because then if you make a business decision later on and you want to switch out of it, it's probably going to hurt. It has great documentation. It really does. So, as I said on the previous slide, like orchestration and automation, aren't that the same thing? Not really. Orchestration is really important if you have multiple devices and you want them to interact together. Because if you make changes on a network device, it's fairly likely that you want to make that change across your fleet. You want your network to be as consistent as possible. That also means that you need to make sure that this is all done properly. So there you need the orchestration instead of just automation, because just automation is doing it on one device automatically. Why Salt though? Salt is incredibly, incredibly fast. Salt is one of the main focus of Salt is speed. The entire design and the architecture behind Salt is speed. It makes sure that most of the things that it can do run concurrently, so it's not bogged down by a slow device, stuff like that. It's really important. More on that is mentioned in the documentation as well. So who uses Salt? Who's salty? Well, as I mentioned before, is LinkedIn is one of the major users, mostly for their servers. We are a major user as well for both the network as well as our servers. There's some other companies that use it extensively as well and are contributing daily to Salt Stack, which is really important. So Salt alone doesn't fix most of the network problems. You need vendor-agnostic automation. You need a vendor-agnostic API, and that's where Napalm comes in. Napalm is the network automation and programmability abstraction layer with multi-vendor support, which basically gives you the opportunity to write a single piece of code and then do it on a multitude of vendor devices like Juniper, Cisco, Aristas, Fortinet. There's plenty of modules available for the major networking players, which means that you only have to write code once, and then it just works on all those devices, which is really cool. So Napalm got integrated in Salt in release Carbon, which was in 2016 by the end of it. It included some basic utilities from Napalm, but the support itself wasn't really all that extensive. This improved massively in Nitrogen, which is great. There got plenty of new modules got added. For example, like netconfig state, which means that you can just easily push configuration changes directly to the device, see diffs, generate diffs, just do a test instead of doing it for real. You can check ACLs, you can do BGP stuff. It's really, really cool. But we also have added Napalm syslog, and that's something I'll be talking about later. So a bit more about vendor-agnostic automation. As you can see on the slide, I run a command on a Junos router as well as an iOS XR router, and as you see, the output is identical. That's not the case if you do it live on the device. You get different output, you get a different format, stuff like that. Napalm takes care of all of it. You no longer have to do any of the parsing or doing all the screen reading. You basically just run the command and you get identical output for everything, which is great because now you can basically just make assumptions about this is the format I'm going to get. These are the things I'm going to do with that format. Again, like we can suddenly start applying configuration changes and do that across multiple devices from multiple vendors. And it will do the exact same thing, but it will properly adopt the config. So you can now apply NTP changes because NTP is being weird or NTP is broken. So you can suddenly just apply the state and then NTP updates. So yeah, there's a lot of documentation, as I said before, about vendor-agnostic automation. Mircea, who was originally going to present this talk, wrote some blog posts, wrote really good documentation on how to use Salt, what's important with Salt. There's plenty of information available. Since the slides are available, just download them, click the links, and get an introduction. So read more, do more, reinvent less. You do not need to reinvent the wheel for everything you do. Make use of the great open source communities that are thriving and building, and use that, contribute. But stop reinventing the wheel for everything you do. So event-driven automation. Network automation is only about configuration management, right? Not really. There's several ways your network device is trying to communicate with you. There's millions of messages, like SNMP traps, which has been around for ages, syslog messages, which has been around for ages, and the new and up and coming, like really cool thing like blockchain is streaming telemetry. You sure you want to ignore that? Like, you sure you don't want to make use of that? For example, with like streaming telemetry, you get push notification instead of pull, which means that instead of being reliant, for example, most SNMP polls are every 5 minutes. Usually if something happens on your device that's critical, you don't want to wait 5 minutes before you take action. So with streaming telemetry as well as SNMP traps, you get instant notification. Same thing with syslog. With streaming telemetry, you get structured data, which is really important because it's consistent across device models, it's consistent across vendors. You get structured objects, mostly using the Yang standards. There's OpenConfig, there's IETF stuff. It's only, that's kind of the bummer, it's only supported on very new operating systems. It's been growing and vendors have been implementing it more and more, which is really good. But for example, on ISXR, it's only available since 6.1.1, UKNOF on 15.1, which isn't even true. It depends heavily on the platform you're using. For example, with syslog messages, you think syslog, there's a standard for that, right? And I'm sure that every single vendor uses that standard. Unfortunately, that's not the case. See here, like with UKNOF, if there's an issue with an NTP server, you get the message as described above. And then you have IOSXR, same issue, unfortunately not exactly the same message. So we ran into that problem. Well, I say we, my two coworkers, Luke Overend and Mircea Ulinic, ran into that problem and realized we need to write a vendor-agnostic tool that can parse these messages, these syslog messages, and make them available in a standardized format. So that's where Napalm logs comes in. What does it do? It listens for syslog messages directly from a network device via UDP or TCP. So you can basically just set it up on the device to push syslog messages to it. Or you can use other systems like Kafka, ZeroMQ. There's plenty of availabilities for listeners. And then you can publish encrypted messages. Like the encrypted part is also fairly important. It will structure these documents using the Yang standards available over, again, several channels that are available. All these publishers and listeners are pluggable, so you can write your own module and listen on a new channel if it's not available yet, and publish on a new channel if it's not available. So here you'll see a general kind of layout of all the things you can listen to or publish to. So you can have a network device push it on a Kafka bus, and then Napalm logs will listen to Kafka and generate the required config, the required log messages, and then it can push them again to Kafka or ZeroMQ, and you can have clients ingest all that information, or you can just have the network device directly connected to Napalm logs. There's no limit to your imagination, basically. So this is an example. In this case, it will be listening on UDP on a specific port, on a specific address, and it will publish on ZMQ, so ZeroMQ. And in this case, we shouldn't do this though, is disable security, which means that we disable encryption and client authentication. This is usually something that you probably might want to use when you're debugging or trialing stuff. So let's have a look at those syslog messages again. So with UKNOF, you get a fairly easy and understandable syslog message. Same thing with ISXR. Let's throw that through Napalm logs. And that's the object that gets generated. And it will be generated identically for both IOSXR as well as UKNOF. So you get the error message, which is NTP server unreachable. You get the facility, which is the identifier of the severity of the error. You get the host, IP, OS, and then you get the Yang message, which is a Yang structured document which gets specified at the bottom using the OpenConfig system data model. But there's also, like, NTP is not the only thing that gets published on syslog. You also have other raw syslog messages. Like, for example, you have a BGP neighbor that it's leaking a full table, and you have proper prefix limit set up. Then you get a BGP prefix thresh exceeded. It will specify the peer, it will specify the S number, and you get the prefix limit. You might want to use that in your network automation to take action or give you a message on like HipChat or Slack or whatever you use for internal communication. And that's what you get. You get a Yang message specifying this is what happened, these are the things, might want to look at that. So what's important to remember about Napalm logs is we're continually listening to syslog messages. We're not querying the device. We're waiting for the device to push information to us. We're continuously publishing the structured data. The moment something comes into Napalm logs, we will parse it, ingest it, and then publish it. So how do you use that with an event automation, with a network automation system? And that's preferably event-driven. So what we use with SALT is we use the SALT event system. SALT is a data-driven system, so every job performed manually or automatically gets put on a bus, and it gets a unique identification tag. So what happens with the syslog messages? We use a thing from Salt called a Salt engine. So we will import messages from Napalm logs onto the Salt event bus. And as you saw on slide 33, this is one of the example messages. We ingest that, we put that on the Salt event bus, and this is what we get on the Salt event bus. You get a specific tag, which in this case is uniquely identified by the operating system, Junos, and the device name, agile1.bgm01. So now we can make fully automated configuration changes. Salt has reactors, which means that we can specify an event tag and then specify a state to be ran when it encounters that specific event tag. So we have, in this case, the exec NTP state, which is basically just going to trigger a specific Salt state, in this case the NTP state, and update the NTP configuration. But there's, again, no limit to your imagination. You can do multiple things. For example, if an interface goes down, you might want to shut down explicitly the interface so it stops flapping, so the customer or your peer is not going to get annoyed because your interface keeps flapping 100 times a minute. But you also might want to send an email to your NOC or whoever is responsible for your actual infrastructure. So conclusion here. Basically what I've been talking about for the past 20 minutes is you have a router, it sends an NTP message to Napalm syslog, to Napalm logs. In this case, the NTP is unreachable. Napalm logs will analyze this message, parse it, and then create a structured Yang-based output, give it to Salt engine. Salt engine will put that on the Salt event bus. Salt reactor will then see that event pass by and then trigger the exec NTP state. And the NTP state will then just do set system NTP server IP address prefer and then just switch out your NTP server that was no longer available with something that you predefined as this is probably an available NTP server now. So one of my coworkers, Mircea, he wrote an excellent book on network automation at scale. I have some with me. Come find me at the social and I'll give you one. Same thing with stickers. It's also available for a free download, so I definitely recommend reading it. It's a really great introduction into Salt and other automation tools and how you can start using it for your own network. If you need help or advice, as I've said, the Salt Stack community and the Napalm community is great. There's Network to Code, which has 2 rooms, Salt Stack and Napalm, where you can just ask questions and someone who wants to, he will help you and they'll give you some more information. Salt Stack community has a separate Slack channel as well, and in the networks, just pop in, ask questions. How can you contribute? It's really important. You're making use of open source tools. Definitely go and contribute. Contribute to Napalm automation, contribute to Salt Stack. So if there's questions, I'm looking forward to hear them.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. Okay, thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you.